Hi, my name is Cheyenne, and I wrote my thesis titled Intersex Embodiments and the Cripping and Queering of the Borders of Identities. And I have made this available at the San Francisco State University library, and it is also available on this website, which I have in the description of this video, as well as probably all the rest of my videos. I'll post that. But what I'm doing is I'm inviting you, that's what this video is, I'm inviting you to participate in this conversation that I have found really interesting, already happening on YouTube. That's what my thesis was around. I find this work to be really extraordinary and really super important, looking at how resistance could be rethought. In my perspective, through my thesis, I've theorized on how resistance movements based in the contemporary United States resistance movements and social consciousness raising movements have been around identity, have been around women's liberation, about Black power or gay pride or deaf culture and deaf pride. There's all these ways that resistance has been held out throughout our culture or started through identity, through I am this, and then you find others that are like you, which I find both incredibly useful in that it fosters together a community, it brings people together, it fights for a common voice, or so it shows, or so it tries, and then it's also problematic. It also excludes people by its very definition. Whenever you define something, you're saying what it isn't. And then that leaves people out. For instance, biracial people, where do they go? People who are hearing impaired, where do they go? People who are like trans women, where do they go? They're not allowed into women's spaces or men's spaces. So these are ways that identity, through my perspective, has not worked, not functioned. So in my thesis, I analyze how these YouTube conversations that are happening, and I have all kinds of links to the conversations I'm talking about through my channel, how these conversations are addressing that in a lot of ways. And it might not be on purpose, directly calling out what, different ways of looking at resistance, but to me that's what I've seen. And we all have our own perspectives, we all have our own ways of looking at things, and there's infinite amount of perspectives that could be had, and I'm not saying that this is truth, and that's, I think, a really important thing that all academics need to say, is that this is not truth. And actually I have a big, a big, I have a beef, I don't know how to say that, I have a big beef with science, academia, history, or democratic voting to show truth, because often it is wrapped up within power structures of racism, in sexism, in cissexism, which are people who are not transgender, that it doesn't really hold the weight of showing what truth is. So I have my cat getting in the way here. So yeah, I have problems with truth in general, and I just want us to be flexible and be fluid with analyzing what truth is. So anyways, I find these conversations to be incredibly important because there's all kinds of debates going on. There is no one single voice that is, that is stamped and marked and written out to be who are intersex people and what are they demanding. There are so many fights and debates, and it's amazing. It really is. It's something that I'm really grateful for, is that people who identify as intersex or who are identified as intersex are rupturing our concepts of what community looks like, of what resistance looks like, or that's what I think is happening. And that's what I talk about in my thesis. So, to go a little bit further into who I am, who is this person, and why is she talking about all of this? First of all, I want to say right off the bat that I have never been diagnosed, nor have I ever suspected myself as being intersexed. Now, there's opinions throughout, throughout everywhere that I can think of, that have talked about how everyone is intersex. I think Peace and Party is a great example of that. That's a great theory, which is that everyone is intersex. There's no single, maybe there's a few, as I think in his words, there's a few 100% males, a few 100% females, but that everyone is in between, and then there's only people who are recognized as such are then marked as being intersexed. So that's an interesting perspective. So I'm not saying right off the bat that I'm not, but I'm also just saying that that's not the perspective that I'm coming from. I'm not coming from as an intersex person, and I think that that's really important too, especially within feminist theory, which is what I'm founded in, looking at how the personal is political and being responsible and respectful to who you're speaking of and the experiences and the privilege that you have. So I want to say that right off the bat. Anyway, so I want to say that I got my bachelor's degree, or I like to call it my bachelorette's degree, in women's studies at Cal State San Marcos. That's in California. It's a state school. It's a very small, struggling program, and it's a phenomenal program. Anyone who's interested in gender and sexuality and activism and resistance and pedagogy or teaching methods, that's the program to go to. I got my first hit of feminism through that program, Cal State San Marcos Women's Studies. And I just completed my master's from San Francisco State University, which is in California, in San Francisco, and I wrote my thesis for for completing that degree this May 2009. So that's where I gained interest within this community. I've not always been intrigued with this community, but I would say that it started actually out of Jeffrey Eugenides' book, Middlesex, I think. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. It is a novel. It's just, I found it really intriguing of how the main character, who is found to be intersex, is just talks about himself. I thought that was really, really interesting, just based around the disability talk that kept going on. I would say half of the novel is tracing back to what went wrong in his family with incest, to prove that he was intersex, or not to prove, that created him as being intersexed or middle-sexed. And I was really bothered by that. And I wanted to look into why I was bothered by that. Disability and transgenderism and intersexuality kind of cross paths in an interesting way, which is why, I found a lot of interest in that. And it grew out of that novel, to be honest. That's where it came from. Or that's how I think it came from. So let's see, looking at my notes. So I just completed my master's program at San Francisco State. It is a post-colonial, transnational feminist-based program. It has some of the most powerful theorists that I've ever read, like Karl Marx and Ella Shohat and Michel Foucault and Karen Kaplan, Homi Bhabha, Judith Butler. I'm gonna probably mention these names, and then do little links and fact sheet sort of things. It's hard to sum up some of what they've written about, or who they are, based within a few sentences or even a link to a fact sheet about their lives, because it's really deep theory, and almost every sentence that they write is packed with all kinds of meanings. So it's going to be difficult, and it's not going to be accurate, and I want to let you know that. But I do want to give you some idea of who these people are if you don't already know. And if you do know, well, now you know where I'm coming from. So I utilize some of these dense and rupturing concepts to approach people on YouTube and what they're saying about being intersex or having disorders of sex differentiation or disorders of sexual development. There's many different terms of how to analyze or how to name people within this group, and that's part of what I critique. So I invite you to read my thesis, which is available online, and check out some of my notes and to join this conversation. And I would like to land some of the game rules for this adventure with these requests.